good. It's good to see all of you, and I think we all kind of report the same thing when we leave this, these meetings, the interactions that we have. It's uplifting. It kind of helps us shift and have a better experience with the day. So this is week 71. We're just talking about mindfulness and how to bring, you know, some of that holistic wellness into everyday living. And to me, mindfulness is a really cool practice because you're delinking from the crap from the past, you're delinking from the worry about the future, and you're just going with the flow, just starting to notice what is helpful. And I love what you were sharing a little bit earlier, Paul, about noticing your energy levels and how you're feeling. Because, once you start noticing that, you can kind of navigate or choose what you want to experience, or the people around you, or the type of things that lend your energy and your time to. So that's the first thing that I just want to open up to everybody is the concept of mindfulness. What does it mean to you? And, you know, how do you use this? How's it been beneficial for you? So for myself, mindfulness to me is being in the present moment, right? It's like it's delinking from everything but here and now. And the way that I use it is the, in this quest for self-awareness, a couple times I've used it to break a like emotional attachment to wrongs in the past. So it's kind of, to me, mindfulness is a perfect way that you can learn forgiveness. It's that approach of forgetting what was wrong and just re-experiencing it for the first time, re-experiencing that person for the first time without judging or bringing that hurt into the present moment. So that's how that's one way that I use mindfulness. But the other one that's a favorite is mindful eating. I think that's the best. And even Ken Caputo talks about if you take like some of these processed foods and put them on your tongue as they sit there, they start off with a little bit of flavor, but then all of a sudden, once that salt or the flavor profile is gone, you start tasting these chemical tastes, and it doesn't taste that good. And it's that your body telling you that this isn't something that you should be eating. So that's another way that I really like mindfulness. So how about for you? We'll start with you, Chan. How do you use what's mindfulness to you, and how do you use it, or how's it influence your life?
So it is pretty much the same. It's about being present. And, in the here and now is really the way I look at it, or I want to say infuse it into my life. I think of mindfulness in everyday tasks. That's where I use mindfulness. Is can I be present in the things that I probably could do automatically without thinking, and bring my attention there, because it tends to, depending on what's happening, tends to anchor me into the moment and, calm me down, slow me down in some ways where there's like a pause or an opportunity to breathe. So like when I brush my teeth or when I wash the dishes or when I'm cooking, is to actually be present, as opposed to, multitasking and trying to do 100 things at once, or, not that things don't come in, but I really find so much of my life I was kind of I was doing, but I wasn't really doing. I was really somewhere else. So it's just a tool I use all the time throughout my day, as a way to stay present.
Thank you for that. And how about for you, Paul? What comes up for you with this idea about mindfulness?
I mean, I love what Jan said. I love what you said. And I think for me, only thing I can add to that is, apropos our discussion from yesterday, I think it's being present and being self-aware. And like for me, where the struggle was today with energy, and using that mindful and self-awareness practice to go, what's energizing me? And what's innovating me, what's taking my energy away. I actually was lying there earlier thinking, oh, I can create a meme with a energy vampire, and the vampire, whatever that represents to you, sucking energy out of your space. So yeah, that's where that practice, and also Like, I mean, the definition of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment. And I think that judgment becomes an innovator. It sucks us dry. It reduces our energy and our will to turn up. And we can identify that. We can really be present and energized.
Thank you for that. And how about for you, Muhib? What does that mean to you, mindfulness, or and how do you use it?
Me or Matthew?
Muhib, you go ahead.
All right. For me, I think I go a step back on living intentionally. Like to do your everyday chores, it becomes habitual as you do more of it, and you become. But living intentionally, knowing specifically why you do what you do, what you're waking up to, being more intentional about your life choices. I think to me, mindfulness begins there.
Thank you for that. And how about for you, Matthew? What does mindfulness mean for you, and how have you used it?
As you know, I'm a pretty simple guy, and I don't really get caught up in thinking, is it right, is it wrong? Like, if it doesn't feel right, then I just don't do it. If I can't control it, I don't worry about it. So I don't really, I just get on with my life and live and just, wait for the shit to come along and then clean the fan. So it doesn't really get more complex than that. I don't spend my time thinking, is it right? Is it wrong? Should I do it? Fuck it, just do it. Get on with your life. That mightn't be the deep, meaningful thing you were after, but that's the Irish feedback.
Usually the most meaningful things are the simplest, and
Well, less is more in my book, anyway.
yeah. Well, thank you for that. And now the question: does anybody have anything that came up from that discussion? Go ahead, Paul.
Just what on Matthew was saying, there's that meme, this too shall pass until some more shit arrives, and then that's the Irish way.
So, did anybody have anything when we were having that discussion? Did anybody have like an idea or something to reflect back on? Anything that came up? So the next question's simply, how have you used mindfulness? And it could either be for yourself or for a client, but what's the benefit there? How can that be used? And again, for myself, it was kind of a shift, because when you're externally focused, especially if you're a people pleaser, if you've grown up with enmeshed boundaries, you're always looking for external validation. You're always looking for someone else to validate and say, hey, this is right, or this is true. Mindfulness, when I first experienced that, you actually can come across some toxic people, and it de-links you from judgment. And so those prickly hairs that stand up as warning, that says, hey, there's somebody here that's a threat. They're not there, and you can actually just experience the person for the first time. And when you experience them for the first time, if it's really a toxic person that's trying to manipulate you, they will notice your non-reaction, and they will escalate. And then all of a sudden they cross this imaginary boundary that says, oh, it's not me, right? I'm not misunderstanding this, because their behavior is so far beyond that you can just be at peace. And you can say, that's kind of odd. That's odd behavior that they're expressing, and without judgment, right? So, but it breaks you free from the manipulation, because you're no longer trying to appease or you're letting them just be how they are. So to me, that was an experience of mindfulness that was really powerful. So, but how about for you, Paul? What was an experience of mindfulness that made a difference in your life?
I think just the practice of mindfulness. I think that's where I grew my self-awareness and this, I mean, gosh, I still struggle with the non-judgment. I have, I guess I have a lot of judgment sometimes. It's part of my personality. Um, but the mindfulness just helps me bring back and refocus and be aware of that and then assess it, I think. So yeah, it's just it is a constant practice for me. And I've got miles to go.
So if you think about it, because it is a skill that you learn that you start off you're not very good at. So when you say you practice it daily, what does that mean? How did you start practicing mindfulness and what was that practice that you started off that you probably didn't do very well and that you got better at?
Well, I did I've got John Kabat-Zinn's course on mindfulness, and there's another chap, Perotto, that has a not he has a mindfulness program as well. And I co-created a mindfulness and leadership program that we presented the first time like 10 years ago. And for me, it was it was just the knowing, like you were talking about extrinsic versus intrinsic, and that I should turn up with what I can control, and my controllable is me. So, and the realization that my mind was all over the place. Um, I mean, to be blunt, when I did my inner life skills coaching, my first exam, my ego was so big. Like when Glenn Douglas listened to the recording, he was like, "Gosh, Paul, all I hear is you." And I said, "Well, who else do you want to hear?" And I think what that mindfulness practice has done is taken me from that place to removing myself from the equation and actually just focusing on, like in coaching, on the other person. But the mindfulness also helps you assess how you're turning up on a daily basis. So in my case, I always feel, I don't know why I always feel this thing that I have to say I have the need to serve, because I think, sometimes I think, gosh, I mean, that's so cliched, but it is this thing in me that just wants to serve. And so mindfulness for me goes hand in hand with that, because the noise in there, the voice in there is like a better me serves better. So I can't just be, I have to observe and be my best me. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're sharing. That internal focus and knowing what you can control and what you can't control and all of that about the choice is wonderful. Any reflections on what Paul shared, Jan or Matthew? So how about for you, Matthew? When you think about mindfulness, how has that been used in your own life, if it has been, and how do you practice it? Or how do you get better at it?
I think if you're talking sessions, it's all down to listening and curiosity and paying attention, but not to the point where it feels like an anal conversation. From the point of view of if you're talking about the session side of it. And I think we talked about this a few times, maybe on the 1 hour notice Tuesday event that I was on. And I think it's around being mindful to not structure a session too structured, if that makes any sense. To try and, have an intro structure, a mid structure, and an outro structure. But in between, I'm mindful to let it just flow naturally. Because for me, in a session, if the person feels like they're being therapized, they're less likely to engage. But if they just feel like, yeah, I'm just having a conversation here, and this guy's asking me some questions, and it seems natural. I think that's it's a lot better delivery for me than trying to be that, how does that make you feel guy that we all love. And I think when I think about the mindful not to be too anal, I suppose, and to just be yourself. Because I think when a lot of people think about coaching, they do think about therapy, they think about structure, they think about somebody just bringing up all the boo-hoos, and they don't really think about how powerfully impactful it can be and how simple it can be to engage without feeling like you have to unlaunch all of your problems onto somebody. That's one of the longest monologues I've done in history. So,
Well, I want to congratulate
you're
you
you're part.
for blossoming. And it's amazing because we're all trying to venture down this path of understanding, and everything that you said was true. So how about for you, Jan? How do you use mindfulness, and if it's a skill that you practice, how do you get better at mindfulness?
It is a skill I practice. It was probably the most vital skill in getting me out of a state of overwhelm and extreme anxiety, to help me get more present and kind of give me a little bit of more space so I could actually even see beyond that state, which when you're in a state of, basically panic attack or almost there, it's very hard to get outside of that kind of extreme anxious state of being. And it was a way for me, and that's why I love like doing it in everyday tasks, because when I was in a state like that, sitting and practicing mindfulness was very challenging because I was too antsy. I couldn't sit down. So it was much more like, can I create a little bit of space around this so I can get beyond that state of extreme into a little bit more space? And then can I then maybe allow myself, or invite myself to practice, more seated mindfulness. It was probably the few trainings I did and courses I did, and then a number of books, my first being The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh, which was probably the book that introduced me to mindfulness and really changed my life as far as that goes. And then, people like Sally Kempton and Sharon Salzberg and Pim Chodron, who I went and took courses with and things like that to get better at practicing mindfulness. And I think I don't want to say, because I think it's all a process, my incorporating it into my everyday life was being able to practice it, and as many moments as I could think to practice it. Like, I'm standing in line at the bank. Can I just be present with that? Everyday tasks where I could just gravitate toward it. And has probably been one of my most instrumental tools in passing on to my, my clients and students, is this idea, especially because a lot of the people I think are in that state, especially now, of overwhelm.
So does anyone have any? Oh, go ahead, Paul.
No, something that just came to me, and I don't know why I haven't made the connection before, is if you look at the definition of mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment without judgment, but then you also look at what Carl Rogers talks about in counseling and therapy, unconditional positive regard, which is basically without judgment. And it's just interesting for me to make that mental connection between those two things, because both of them really speaks to the heart of what mindfulness for self. But when you bring mindfulness into dealing with somebody and coaching somebody, and have complete, you often refer to, you haven't lived their experience is unique, Stephen. And then that's that thing about unconditional positive regard is bringing, and that for me also relates to the fact that it's like bringing no judgment to it at all.
No, that's a wonderful way to put it. And I think that go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, it's just around the practice of mindfulness, and do you get to a stage where your personality and intuition just automatically fixes your mindset? How much do you have to practice before 75% of situations are naturally fixed by your own experience and personality and mind, not really overthinking it. But then there's the smaller amounts of situations where you have to kind of sit back and think about something. So it was just a thought around how much practice do you have to do so that the kind of mundane stuff just gets automated, and the more complex things you have to stop and think. That's a simple thing.
Thank you. Jane, is that related to the thread?
Mhm.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that where I know in my own life where I think it's become very vital is in like emergency situations and things that kind of come at you and are shocking or upsetting, extreme things where all of a sudden I'm much more able to cope and kind of not react and respond with, just an element of presence. So I think that that's where I feel like it's useful to kind of get really, I hate using the word proficient, but kind of like, I can't right now think of another word, where it becomes just a part of your toolbox that you kind of go to it all the time. Because I think in those kinds of circumstances, it is a vital tool to be able to sit there and say, okay, so-and-so just died, oh my gosh, so-and-so called, there's an emergency. And all of a sudden you have to like react or, respond in a timely manner. And this way you don't go into that state of panic or overwhelm in situations. So that's where I have found it really beneficial.
Go ahead, Paul.
I love that, John, because that just like, we in coaching, we talk about locus of control. And what you've just described is an expansion of that. It's like, so if we practice mindfulness, what we're able to comfortably control naturally increases. So, yeah, I mean, I can't put it more simple than that.
And what comes to me is it's interesting that we're talking about a certain skill here, but they're all meshed together, because what you had just mentioned also incorporates resilience, right? So we have emotional resilience, and sometimes we have, minimizing the mental traffic that might be in our mind. And if we can use mindfulness to become aware of what we're experiencing, what we're experiencing in this moment, then maybe we can become more resilient and utilize some of these other tools to shift our experience, not so much shift what is going on around us, but it's the way that we engage with that. And it's realizing that when we feel grief, we may intentionally choose to be sad or choose to grieve. We can honor our emotions as they are and not judge them, and then just move on, right? And it takes the pressure off, because you're not self-judging. You're not trying to be strong when you don't need to be, right? It's all these different ideas that are there. So go ahead, Jan.
Just to your point, Stephen, about resilience, is I think it also makes you better able to heal physically from something. One is it gives you a little bit more space, and obviously those, all the stress doesn't help any sort of healing or illness anyway. But it allows you to be in a space of like, I remember when I was in a car accident and basically nothing was broken, but I went black and blue from like the tops of my legs to my collarbones, it was entire from the airbag coming out, So I remember laying there, and there I am, a yoga teacher, I'm sitting there and I'm like in the hospital, like I'm in the AR, and then home thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm never going to move again, like kind of thing, how am I going to teach in and just being able to sit there and say, okay, just heal, be present with this, just heal. It's not going to be like Matthew says, like it's going to pass, or Paul, but just being able to stay present for that. And I think in the healing process, especially when you feel vulnerable, like all of a sudden when something like that happens, you realize how fragile you are. And you're like, oh, okay, it'll heal. And it was just, I remember it allowing me more space because, being someone who moves, so that requires a lot of patience, that healing process, especially if you're used to moving, you're sitting there, you're like, oh gosh, I can't do that yet. And a month goes by, kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's really vital to the physical healing process in addition to all the rest.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And, not only for physical, but I think also emotional as well. It's that we can still have that same kind of trauma emotionally. Go ahead, Matthew.
I think this thing here is part of our mindset and my new mindset, because before COVID, I would have been, where's the gap? Where's the gap? Where's the gap? Where's the gap? Jump in. So that's just one thing. But I think from a mindset point of view, when you get to a certain age, 50 to 60, you start thinking about, okay, I've accumulated a certain amount of stuff or whatever. And so many people, I suppose Trump being a good example, just keep on going when there's so much shit built up. And it's that mindset to think about, right, I have enough shit now, I'll just stop and I'll do a bit of living before I have to be looking up at the brown and green stuff. That's just something that popped into my mind because, as you know, about 2.5 years ago, I decided enough was enough, and I left the company I was in because I had looked at everything that I had done, and because I log all of my time in an online project management tool, even though I'm in sales, and I thought to myself, holy shit, I've worked 10 years longer than I should have. When I calculate the travel time, the overtime, the stupid time, and all the other stuff that I put in, and then I think, right, okay, I'm 53 and a bit now, and if I add 10 onto that, I'm 63. So that's early retirement. Right, I'm out of here. But it's that mindset of when is enough enough? What do you really need? This goes back to the group that I'm in with Stephen and Michael Keating, and I think Jan, you're in it as well. Simply live simply, or the other way around. Can't really remember. But it's just that thought around, it's really the when is enough enough, and what is enough, and should you be thinking about, right, I have enough now, what will I do next, kind of thing.
So thank you for that. And that seems like it'd be a reoccurring theme, is detaching from external attachments, whether it be stuff, or whether it be, activities that you're doing, or identities, maybe like a job or something like that. If we can detach and find something that's inherent to our own value, independently of anything that we do or have, we can have that sense of value, or that sense of significance, independent of anything going on in our life, which is a very, very positive place to be, because you're not chasing something that's external. So that kind of brings me into my next question. It's like, so from what I'm noticing is mindfulness is a way for us to recognize the power we have over self-regulation. It's regulating the way that we think. It's bringing in awareness that our thoughts and where we place our focus have an influence on how we feel and our emotions. And it seems like such a subtle thing, but I've noticed that in my own mind, I've been able to quiet that inner critic, and it's just like you can actually reprogram the way that you think. Most people don't recognize that, and it's like the people that have done it have just got to a point where they just said, okay, enough's enough, and they're going to have to change the way that they think. So the question is how can mindfulness raise awareness to the influence that we have on our human experience? So how can we use mindfulness to recognize how we can actually influence the way that we think or feel? Who wants to go first?
I'll do it handless this time. I think it goes back to what Jan said, and you using it to calm yourself, calm the situations, and that gets back to calm as well. Stop, listen to the other side, manage the conversation instead of just jumping straight into like a conflictual argument. So that's where mindfulness comes up for me, from the point of view of before I would have been very quick to jump in if somebody criticized me, but now I question it and I try and turn it into a productive conversation, rather than feeling that somebody is maybe just saying, I think it could be done differently, but they're saying it like, you've done this wrong. So being mindful of the structure of how you talk to people and how you ask them questions can be really important from the point of view of not creating toxicity. So like, if you think of a coaching question, like, is there a different way that you think you could have done that? Or, instead of saying, well, you didn't do it right that time, what are you going to do now? Do you know what I mean? So it's trying to be positive framing, I guess.
It's interesting you say that, because what comes to mind is this idea that it's a trigger. And is it really toxic, or is it our trigger? Because that's kind of a self-awareness journey as well. And I do remember mindfulness being one of those tools that I use, that when you become curious about your triggers, right, you actually get excited when you think that you've kind of managed all of your triggers and you're in a wonderful Zen place, and then somebody triggers you again. It's like, oh, good, something else to work on. I thought I had them all done, and it's an interesting place to be when you actually have gratitude for a trigger, because you're seeking to understand what are these triggers that are within you. And I don't know, it's a surprising state to be in, because then you recognize that we do have control over all of our triggers, and the toxicity is a scale, right? So people are really toxic, but I think what we're saying is they're really triggering us, right? It's like, and I agree with you, Matthew. There's some people that the only way that I can manage and interact with them is from a distance, because the way that they interact is just, there's some values or something that they're violating constantly. So how about for you, Paul? I think the topic we were talking about is, do you remember? It's like, how.
Ask the question again. I have something in my head, but I just want to make sure I'm on
Oh,
topic.
no, go ahead. Whatever's in your head. That's all. That's valid.
No, what that question brought to mind for me was me this morning. And, like I said earlier, I'm out of sorts today. And I was trying to figure out why I'm out of sorts. Now, I think there would have been a time where I would just have acted and from that out of sorts place and not question it, and just there may have been some unnecessary head bumps and situations during the day. But not that what I'm about to say completely remove that feeling, you know. And I must say, this feeling is that I get isn't just like, oh, pie in the sky feeling. I had it when we were attacked. I've had it when somebody drive into a car. I'm precognitive on certain things. You know, take that as it is, whatever that means to you. So there's always that for me when I have this feeling. It's like, okay, is there something there that I should be aware of more? Why can't I pick up on that? And then there's also this, okay, like this morning, there was in quick succession a bunch of messages from different people that caused me slight annoyance. And then I'm like, okay, why am I finding it difficult to be compassionate here? Why am I finding it difficult? Why is it that I want to be unkind? Why is this being triggered in me? And I think, so what I'm describing is not perfection. It's not the ideal. I mean, I'd like to be in a place ideally where I could just go, oh, you know, shit is shit, and I'm not triggered by it, or I have no emotions or feelings about it. But there are emotions and feelings, but I'm in a place where you go, okay, let's look at those, understand them, and see how you can turn out better. How do you mention the word values, Stephen? And that's pretty much what happened for me this morning. It's like, okay, these are the things you value. These are your values. So how are these responses indicative of those values? Because, I mean, are you a fraud or are you real? I mean, so how do you live your values? I mean, you have to be an exemplar for those. God, anybody watching this is going to think, shit, he overthinks.
But what's amazing is we're thinking out loud, and most of the people that are deeper thinkers, the ones that have gone through the shit, the ones that have decided there's a way out of the hole, you start wondering about some of these things, because the simplest idea is that if we can understand what it is that we did to shift our mindset and to shift the way that we experience life, that there's actually people out there that were born this way. They didn't have to fall in the hole in the first place. They just walked along and said, "Oh, there's a hole there. I'm not going to step in it." The rest of us just kind of fell into the thing. It's like, "Oh shit, there's a hole here." And and when you start becoming self-aware, it's like you start noticing how many people are just heading straight for that hole. And it's like, if we could find something simple enough where it would move that power of awareness back to them, where if you want to be in the hole, be in the hole. That's okay, right? There's no judgment there. But the question is do you want to be in the hole?
Mm.
And let's make that choice intentionally. And if and then you're not quite so upset when the people point out that there's a hole up ahead or something like that. So I don't know. I liked what you said, and I think that most of this is that we've got patterns of thinking and patterns of feeling, and we never question it. So if we can start using mindfulness as a way to just notice, then maybe we can wake up. So
Interrupt that pattern, interrupt that pattern. I mean, because for some people, that thinking, I know I've been guilty of it 20 years ago and so on, where that could stick for days. It's there and and for me, it's like, I don't want to be in that space. I refuse to be in that space. And I know the only way to bring it back is to apply and be honest and brutally honest with what's my mindset and what am I telling myself and what can I tell myself to shift it?
Mhm. Well, I appreciate that. So let's just do a coaching question if you guys want to. We can either do it on personal development or coaching, but how might you use coaching?
I mean, I didn't go, Stephen.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. I
All
didn't
right.
answer that. So a few thoughts came to mind. One is the whole idea of, that thing that the triggering that you find it. And I think of the word refining. So it's constantly like you're refining, or in yoga, we always say polishing. You know, you're polishing a glass that becomes fogged, or we say the mirror of the heart, but it's kind of like constant, like it gets foggy and you kind of have to take out an imaginary rag and kind of clean it up a little bit. So that's the image, like the physical image that comes to my mind. But I think for me, this whole idea of mindfulness is being a better listener, and whether that be to someone else or to myself, I'm a better listener. And and I had this experience yesterday of speaking to an old student that I hadn't spoken to in a really long time. And I've been really practicing my listening skills because my mind goes very quickly and I tend to like automatically be going to the solution for whatever it is that's going on with someone. And I don't really listen because I'm in my head of thinking about how I'm going to respond, or I used to be, as opposed to, being there for them. And it was a beautiful conversation because I felt really truly present, like I was mindful of her, and in the process she became more mindful because I was kind of keeping her focused, like I was keeping her mindful, as opposed to letting her run in 1,000 directions kind of thing. And so it was really interesting conversation. And to Paul's point about, things that 10 years ago, and I always said my measurement was I had a particular situation that I would react to. And I used to go into a deep, dark depression for like a month. And then it started to get to be 3 weeks. And then it was 2 weeks. And then something recently, a few months ago, something happened. And usually it's around your family. Most of the time it is. And something happened and I was like, okay, just let it go. And it was gone. And I said, progress, after 20 years, but it worked, it was just like, okay, it's fine, And I think you also learn what you need to take ownership of and what is the other person's stuff. And that's what I've come to learn through that whole mindfulness process around like my family situation is like, this is really not about me. This is really about them. And so that, I think to me, that's why mindfulness has become so vital.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Have you gone, Matthew?
I don't know. I'm just getting very mindful of the sun shining off my car and coming in and hitting me on the side of my face.
Oh, I thought you were becoming self-aware, and that was the enlightening process.
I'm going to try something there 1 second, just to see if this makes any difference. Is that better or worse?
No, better.
If I'm more in focus, it's worse.
Well, it's whatever you want.
No, that's my newer lights that I got. But
Well, so one idea that came forward with this idea of mindfulness is that Ken Caputo shared with us that some of the teachers in mindfulness, they say that we've brought over the idea of being present, but we've forgotten the concept of compassion. And you had mentioned that, Paul. How can we actually incorporate compassion, into this process of being present? And I think if we expand upon that, if we're truly mindful, it'll improve our relationship with self. Because what I came across is it improves your communication, it improves emotional regulation, it improves empathy and compassion, conflict resolution, and it strengthens your connection. So to me, it's like that's not only beneficial to others, but what if we use that on ourselves first? What if we became mindful with ourselves? Right, mindful of our human experience. I think that could have a huge influence on where we're at. So, what was your takeaway from today? How about we start with you, Jan?
I don't know if I had just one. I think I just loved the conversation because I think I loved the way we threaded it through and how each person, and their experience, it was beautiful, like to see how each one of us has included mindfulness in our lives. And I think that, you realize the more I chat about it and listen to everybody, the more I realize how vital, like the importance of it. I think it's something that I've been doing for so many years. I don't necessarily give it credit sometimes. I'm just kind of like it's automatic, but how vital it is to, I think, all the things you mentioned, Stephen.
Well, thank you for that. And how about for you, Matthew? What was your takeaway from today?
It just actually popped into my head there now. It's about being mindful of what you control, what you don't control. And the reason why I say that is that I'm involved in two businesses and I'm not really actively involved in any of them. And some of them I don't really get that much information because things might not be going as well as I would expect. And they're thinking Matt will give us a load of shit if we're not making the numbers or whatever. But I'm kind of mindful that look, that's somebody else's problem. That's for them to take care of. And the reason why I stripped myself away from that was to not have that being part of my mindset. And it was something I was thinking about it yesterday, about writing some really shitty right to information letter to some of the other shareholders, but I held off. So that kind of popped up and they're just like not worrying about stuff that you just can't control. And I don't really anyway, but sometimes things float in and you just gotta say bye-bye, push them back out again. Don't let them in, don't let them take over. But I think one of the other main things that popped up for me, and this is coming up so many times, is the word toxic. And we talk about mindfulness and techniques around mindfulness, the meditation, the yoga, and for me it's walking. And I'm thinking like we never would have thought about how we need skills around controlling those things if there was less toxicity around us, you know? And now I keep on saying that about surrounding yourself with positive people, or it doesn't even have to be positive, it just has to be not negative. There's a lot of people that I hear on these audio rooms that I go to on LinkedIn. They may have problems. There was one girl, I can't remember where she was from, but she started crying in the audio room because her mom had died, and the people that she was working with after, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks or something, they were just saying things like, get on with it. You have to get on with it. You have to do your job. And they weren't really being compassionate or anything like that. And she ended up leaving the job. And that's just one thing that popped in as well. So that's, yep.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, Matthew. And how about for you, Paul? What was your takeaway?
I'm with Joanne. It was just such a tapestry of things that landed again. It's such an interesting subject. And yeah, so I just really enjoyed it all. I mean, I made loads of notes, you know me and my notes. And I think, yeah, just making this has helped me make new mental connections. And so, yeah, I'm very appreciative of it.
And I share the same thing. It's this idea that we've all experienced what we call this, and it's all had an influence on our life, but we may not have given it much thought, or we may not have dove into what we actually call this type of thing. But I do believe that if we are in the present moment, and I think it was Mingyur Rinpoche, it's the Eastern monk that had passed away recently. He would talk about don't bar the front door to the emotions, right? Leave the front door open, but just open up the back door too. So it's like when they come in, just let them go back out. So what he was saying is, if you try to resist, that resistance actually creates the energy that you're now fighting. And so the more that you resist, the harder you have to fight, and you exhaust yourself. Um, so it's a good place to be. So thank you all for being here. And my biggest takeaway is that we can, it doesn't matter how we understand or how we practice things. It's finding what works for each one of us. And I do believe that all of these different things are tools and skills that we can use to grow in emotional intelligence, that we can grow in self-awareness. And in effect, we can actually have a better influence on our life. So thank you all for being here. And you actually bring the wisdom that when everyone shares, we all go away with more wisdom.